Well, welcome back. This is part 5 of our study we've entitled Come Meet God. And we're going through this passage of Scripture from chapter 19 of Exodus where they met God at Mount Sinai and he gives them the law and enters into this covenant relationship with Israel. We're now in chapter 20 looking at the 10 commandments, and we're going to look at the fourth of those commandments today. And let me just read this passage to you. It's verses 8, 9, 10, and 11 of Exodus 20. If you have a Bible, please follow along as I read. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So God built into their calendar, and I think by way of principle we should build into our calendar a special time to do some very special things for the Lord. Basically, he said about 14% of your work life and your life, I should say, is to be in rest and worship, and the other 86%, that's your 6 days to do what God is wanting you to do on a normal level. So let's think about it. Maybe you can think about this. This might be a good opening discussion question if you're doing this in a group. And remember, you can feel free to pause. I also want to remind you to get a copy of the study guide that's available to you. It looks something like that. And you can download it from wherever you're getting this series from, or just visit our main kind of the all-encompassing website for all of this teaching material. It's called livingthewordtoday.com. And you can go to the teaching series, find the Come Meet God section, and you can be ready to go and download these. But to meet God, we need to reorder our view of reality, and part of this is how we spend our time, particularly Sabbath day. So you might think, because this might be the interesting discussion question, this is where I started a moment ago, is how, when you were growing up, how did you spend your Sundays? Now, depending on whether you were Christian, went to church, maybe it was no day different than the other day, maybe it was a day that was different than every other day. But maybe think about your own experience. And even over time, as a culture, we have changed our experience from what we as a culture used to do to what we as a culture now, how we look at what Sunday means and what that means in our world today. So you may think about that. But I want to just share with you 3 basic ideas, and then we'll give you some discussion questions that you can kind of take and make this a little more a part of your life, that you can find where this passage allows itself to be living in your life and living the Word today, living it out, putting it into place in your life. So it says, remember the Sabbath day. Remember. First of all, we need to take time to remember. He says you need time to get away. You need time to refocus. You need time to reset everything. We have in our home we have a handcrafted grandfather clock that the wood part of it my father made for me back when he was able to do woodworking, and it's a beautiful thing. But it's manual and it's analog. I'm going to say it that way. But you have to pull down these chains to pull these weights up, and there's 3 of them that run the mechanism, and it lasts about 7 days, about a week. And then those weights will get down at the bottom. If you don't rewind them, they hit the bottom, it stops ticking. But if you keep pulling it back up, once a week you got to reset this thing to keep it running. And God says, you need to remember me every once in a while. That'll keep you running. And we need to remember a couple of things. First of all, that He is the Creator. He made everything. That first week that we just read about in verse 11 is a week where He made everything in 6 days, and then He took the opportunity on the seventh day indeed to rest. And then remember this, that we are the creation. Okay? And we, before Him, need to reset. We need to remember Him. We need to think of Him. And that's what worship does for us. That's what a day different does for us. And I understand we all have different sensibilities and different patterns, but this is a principle. This is a principle that we as New Testament believers need to put in place, that we need a time of rest and worship, and we need to remember. So it's not just a day to stop work, and we'll come to that a little bit later, but it's also a time for us to think about Him. For most of us who are believers, our pattern is to gather in worship on the Lord's Day. And we gather for worship. And I love when we're together in worship. I love to hear people sing. One of the things I love to do on occasion is when people are surrounding me in worship and that we're singing, is just to stop singing for a moment and just listen to those voices. It just sort of lifts my heart back into the presence of the Lord. And I will join back in singing. I'm not mute the whole time, but I love to hear that sound where we're collectively. And singing is one of those few things that we're all doing at the same time, saying the same words, testifying to the same truth. So I hope you enjoy that as well. So we need that. So just some questions to help you think this through. Why do we need to remember who you are and who God is. Just answer that question in your own words. Why do we remember these things? How does that reset us? And remember, you can do this however you want. You go all the way to the end, go over the discussion guide, or you can pause and answer the question and go back to this teaching, which we try to keep these about 15, 16 minutes. Second question, why does an absence of work allow us to do? What does an absence of work allow us to do? Why do we have to stop work to worship, in other words? Why does that work and how does that work? You discuss that and you think about that, and maybe you can find some great ways to put this into place. And what does work at the proper time allow us to do? Because he says 6 days you do all your work, okay? So think about that as contrasting with what an absent work allows us to do and what does a presence of work allow us to do. All those things fit into God's economy. It's not an either or, it is indeed a both and. Secondly, we need to take time to connect or reconnect. And that's the part where he says in verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. This day is different. We need to make it a day different because he is different. He is holy. And holy just means to put in a category that's completely separate from every other category. In other words, this is this kind, this is this kind. This is a category way over here that doesn't match any other category. God's in a category of holiness all by himself, unique, special, one of a kind. So we treat this day as unique, special, and one of a kind. And we need to treat it differently. We do different activities. We have different patterns, different routines, different thoughts, different pursuits of mind, heart, spirit, and body. So we do that because he is different. Now you might say, well, why do we worship on Sunday when this is all talking about the Sabbath, which we know is on the last day of the week? Let me just give you a few scriptures. You might want to jot these down. Acts 20, verse 7, where Apostle Paul talks about, the first day of the week. 1 Corinthians 16, verses 1 and 2, where he writes the church in Corinth, and he says he's trying to raise an offering to relieve suffering believers. And he says, when you come together on the Lord's day, so already this first day of the week, on the first day, you come together, lay aside this offering. And on this first day is what the pattern was of worship, because many of the New Testament believers were no longer exclusively Jewish, but Gentiles were coming in. They didn't have this habit of a Sabbath day routine, so they just naturally picked a day, and it was the first day of the week. And it seems to be, it was called the Lord's Day, and that's what John calls it in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 10. It says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. It seems to be because it was on the first day of the week that Jesus was raised from the dead that they naturally gravitated to this as the day of worship. We honor our Lord. And same principles, but a different pattern. And we need to make the day different because we are different, because we are to be holy. And he's calling them to be holy like he is holy. And this is not primarily external, although we have external things we do and don't do. I know our own pattern as a family over the years has been we obviously gather for worship when our church gathers for worship. And for me, it's a time usually to be teaching the Word of God. But the rest of this day is a day that we don't do our normal activities. We try to do as little commerce as possible. We try not to do housework and outside work. It's a day just to let our bodies rest. I know some of our neighbors, and if any of them are listening, I hope they're not offended by this. but nonetheless, some of them, especially in the summer, I'm trying to rest and relax, and suddenly all the lawnmowers around me kind of fire up at the same time. Try to avoid that if at all possible, and try not to make it legalistic, but just keep this day as different. And here's some questions that maybe can help you press a little bit further in this. And it's simply this: how is a day to worship holy? What qualities make it holy? And how can we make it so in our lives and our minds? How can we treat it as holy and something different? You think about some practical ways. Maybe some things you haven't done, you do. Maybe some things you incorporate. Maybe some changes you might need to make. And if work on Sunday is not optional, and many times that is true for us, just a couple blocks down from where the studio is where I'm recording this is a fire station. If it's Sunday, it's the Lord's Day, day of worship, and we need some help, I'm going to push 911, and I know those guys and gals down there they're not loafing. They're working, and they come and do whatever needs to be done. Actually, I hope it's a very boring day for them. I hope they don't have any emergencies to need to respond to. But I'm glad they're able to respond when they need to. So, but if work on Sunday is not optional, and for many of you we know that's not true, how can you still make some time in your week different? Good question to ask. Lastly, we need to not only take time to remember and to reconnect. That's reconnect with God and treat things differently. And also, in some ways, maybe reconnect with each other as we gather for worship. But we need to take time to recharge. And he says in verse 6, I should say, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. So give you 6 days to work. But on this seventh, here's what you do. It is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you should do no work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. Everybody stops working. And I remember several years ago, Julie and I were in Israel, and with the Jewish mindset being so much in that state, I remember that it was interesting that that on the Sabbath day in the hotel we were staying in, the elevator shifted. And rather than pushing the button, I'm going to go from first floor to sixth floor, that didn't work. You just pushed a button or you got in. Actually, they just ran automatically. And it would stop at every floor going up, and it would stop at every floor going on, because the fact that pushing buttons could be construed as work. Now, maybe you might think that's extreme, but it just says that there was this reality that work stopped, and literally everything stopped on the Sabbath when we were there. So it's a time for us, and God knew we needed a time to recharge our body. We were not made for endless work. And understand, he says in verse 11, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth. This goes back to the first of Genesis, back in the beginning of this collective work of books that we call the Bible. So the Sabbath was not anything new. He just mentions it in the commands because he wanted us to connect with him. Remember, these commands are a lot more about what it says about God than what it says about us. And remember, these first 4 commands: have no other gods, no graven image, don't take the name of the Lord in vain, and remember the Sabbath day, are all about our vertical relationship. The last 6 are about our horizontal relationship. And Jesus summarized all this in the New Testament. He said that, the law can be summarized in this: love God and love man. Love your neighbor as yourself. So it's seen in that reality. But the fact was that it connects to that you work for 6 days, but then he did mean us for this, to be people who are involved in ceaseless worship and set aside a day for worship. He says, and for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it, because of God's pattern. And by the way, you think about a week being 7 days long. There's reasons why months and years are as long as they are. A year is the amount of time it takes the earth to make one complete circle around the sun. 365 and a quarter days. That's the reason every 4 years that quarter day gets lumped together into a leap day and a leap year. There's a reason that a month is about 30 days long, and some, short as 28 in February, and then some months are 31, but about that. It approximates the lunar calendar. Basically, it takes about 29 and a fraction days for the moon to make one revolution around the earth, and we can track its phases just as simply as looking into the sky and seeing what phase of the moon it is. So a calendar is sort of based on a lunar calendar, but a 7-day week has no astronomical feature to it. You can't divide 30 into 7 evenly, or even 29 into 7 easily, and so forth. So it doesn't make good sense. Except this is the pattern that God established in creation, and we still follow it. Back during the French Revolution in the 1800s, because they were so wanting to get rid of the church, and church and state were combined, you understand, hard for us to remember. But they so wanted to get rid of the corruption, the tyranny. They not only wanted to get rid of the state with a new government, they wanted to get rid of God's rule as far as the church, because they saw it all in one. Basically, their motto was neither God nor king. We don't want anybody ruling over us. We need a whole new thing. And they tried to switch the work week to a 10-day week, which seems it would fit, okay? 30-day month, 3 weeks of 10 days, that's very even. It all fits very nicely. But it wasn't very long till the people just couldn't take it, and they reverted back to a 7-day week. It seems like that's just how God patterned it. And it all goes back to this first week. So this pattern of us celebrating the Sabbath 1/7 of our time, about 14% of our time, that we worship him, was put in there. Some questions to help you take this a step further. They're in your study guide. Why is it hard to find time to recharge? Now, many of us don't have that problem, but there's many of us who could be charter members of Workaholics Anonymous. So you find that pattern. And why is it easy to over-recharge? Some of us are charter members of Napaholics Anonymous. I don't think there is such a thing. But you understand that. But why is it, we go to the extremes, working all the time or just living a life of leisure. Somewhere in that gap, it's the cycle. 6 days, do your work, and the 7th-day rest, worship, reconnect, okay? Last question. How does God's example in the first week influence your current week? Is there some change I need to make? Something I need to, in my mental state, in my action, in my plans, my agenda, my heart's attitude? You think about how that first week's example can change this one. God truly knows us, and he knows that we need to remember the Sabbath day. We need to remember him. He's the creator. We're the creation. He really knows that we need to reconnect with him, treat this day as different, treat him as different, and see that we're different because of him. And we also need to recharge. We're not made for endless work, but we are made for continuing worship and praise. This is a day to do that, and a day then to recharge our bodies, knowing he did not want us to work all the time. Well, thank you for joining me for this study, and I hope you're enjoying this study, Come Meet God. And I look forward to being back with you in session 6, when we're going to look at this package of these last 6 commandments in the 10 commandments as we continue this study. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for encouraging me in it. We'll see you next time. God